Welcome to the Unbecoming Hub podcast. Reflections about being human without treating yourself as something to fix. I'm your host, Lacey Kelly. So, are we becoming more emotionally mature, or are we becoming more emotionally distant? This is a topic I know all too well, and something I see a lot in therapy culture and self-help culture. So I want to talk about it today. Before I do, disclaimer, I am recalling one of the lived truths in the process of unbecoming to talk about this, which is wholeness includes contradiction. So everything I'm going to talk about on this podcast today about emotional maturity and emotional distance does not negate the fact that we also still want to try in our relationships. We want to try. This is not a pass to say, you have to accept me as I am no matter what all of the time. We still need to try. And we're human. So this is more to say that we try, and in the moments where our humanness comes out full force, that we don't take it as evidence that something is wrong. So that's more of what we're holding in the podcast today. So on with it. I'm going to start with a little story, a little personal reflection, because the way I decided I wanted to talk about this was just an experience I had recently. So a few weeks ago, I'm kind of one of those people that I don't realize I'm burned out until it's too late. Like I go. And then one day I look up and I'm like, oh my God, I'm exhausted and I'm going to lose it. And had one of those moments recently. It's just one of those days where you wake up and you're like, it's probably better I just keep to myself today. And, I live with my husband. Keeping to myself is sometimes hard when you live with another human. And in my mind, I was stacking up all the reasons he was contributing to my overwhelm. So he was my target as well. And part of me could see I was doing that. And a part of me was like too burned out to stop that. So by the end of the day, he says, I put my son to bed, come downstairs. He's like, so should I just leave you alone, or you want me to talk, or, And I thought, yeah, it's probably better we just part ways for the night, Now I was going to go upstairs. And before I go further with my story, I'm going to pause and describe how I used to see emotional maturity. Emotional maturity in relationships used to feel like choosing my words really carefully, staying calm no matter what, using expert communication tools all of the time, not escalating at all, and being regulated before I speak. So even if my insides are like on fire, don't show it on the outside. That was like my mantra, just like appear calm. And it felt really responsible. It felt like I was doing it. I was doing emotional regulation by eating all of my feelings and talking around them and just staying with the script. And now in hindsight, I can see I was really trying to control a situation in doing that. I kind of felt like, well, if I just say the right thing and I don't escalate, then the situation will stay calm and maybe I'll be heard and I'll feel validated and the person will understand and everything can just move forward all fine. Almost like if I remained calm, then they can remain calm. If I say everything perfectly, then they are going to hear me. So all of my regulation was really just trying to like regulate the other person into hearing me. We don't have that kind of control. That was like totally an illusion and probably very frustrating to interact with in a moment of tension. I can also see it in hindsight now as being afraid of vulnerability. That vulnerability comes in those messy moments and the repair afterward. Vulnerability is not the perfectly constructed therapy sentences that are coming out in a robotic tone, the script. Is there vulnerability in a script? Maybe the words, but if you're not feeling the words you're saying and you're just saying the words, it's a little off, not quite vulnerable. And I had a really, I think, big fear of being seen as a mess, out of control, disorganized. I didn't want to be seen that way. It felt like a contradiction to my personality. And those were things I needed to just keep to myself, not appropriate for relationships. And I think therapy culture kind of reinforces this a little bit. There's this idea that we can, if we just regulate enough, then our relationships are easier. And I don't know if any of you have had that experience, but in my experience, my ability to regulate, just me, myself, and I mean, it helps, but if I'm regulating in the way that I was just describing, where I'm thinking I can regulate the situation through my regulation, it doesn't quite go so well because the person you're communicating with is a human and probably can feel that a little bit. And it's a little off-putting, feels inauthentic. And so our therapy culture, our self-help culture kind of reinforces this, that if you do it right, then you should get a better outcome. And that's not quite the way it goes. So that concept of emotional maturity, I think, is kind of the dominant perspective. And that anything that deviates from that is not mature, it's emotional immaturity. But what I just described and what I used to see emotional maturity as is quite emotionally distant, actually, in a relationship. The polished communication replaces actual connection that could be there, that vulnerability piece. All the regulated language, we're missing the shared experience of what's happening and constantly trying to translate our feelings into acceptable forms. Like we're keeping ourselves so contained, so tight. It's like, can become armor, like all that therapy language and the pressure to just get it right can feel like a shield because it's actually coming from this place of trying so hard to control a situation or get a certain outcome. We want to be heard so bad that we think if I can just do this right, then I'll finally be heard. And it just doesn't work out. We keep missing each other because, that vulnerability and actually hearing each other requires emotion, requires the emotion coming through. So back to my story. All that being said, I was going to go upstairs, mind my own business, come back in the morning, calmer, clearer head, say what I want to say. And that would have been fine, like that paradigm, that would have been fine. We could say that's emotional maturity too. Like, hey, I recognize I need some space. I'm going to go take that space. Great. That would have been totally fine. Nothing wrong with that. But then my husband asked me a question as I was walking up the stairs. I don't remember the question now, but I was not contained after that. All at once, I did not hold myself together anymore. It all came out. All of it came out. It wasn't regulated. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't well constructed. It wasn't calm. It wasn't contained. It was just like blah. And then he was like blah in response to my blah. And there we were together, escalated, tense, not happy. And we went to bed angry. And that was it. In the past, I would have looked at that moment and I would have gone upstairs and I would have ruminated in bed about all the ways I failed to regulate, like something's wrong. There's another stone to turn over because I shouldn't have reacted that way. I lost my cool. I have more inner work to do to stay calm in communication. I would have interpreted it as I'm emotionally immature. I have more work to do. This shouldn't happen in a relationship. And then it would turn into something about my relationship. Like, are we okay? Why would this happen? Why are we fighting? Is there something deeper going on? So I would have taken that moment of me just like, here comes the overwhelm spilling out, and him spilling back at me because that's understandable to do. I would have taken that and used it as evidence that something is really wrong. This shouldn't be happening. Because I have this standard in my mind of emotional maturity and what relationships should look like, what good communication should look like. And I wasn't matching that, which means there's a problem. And now I see that as just a human moment. I mean, how can you get through a relationship and not have moments like that? I don't think you can because we're human. And this is one of the things that I see a lot in therapy culture and self help culture. Like, we're trying to therapy ourselves out of these human moments, and it just doesn't work. So it was human. It was a human moment. And the next morning, I was calmer. He was calmer. We had a conversation. I shared what I was feeling. He shared what he was feeling. I apologized. He apologized. There was mutual responsibility. Closeness returned. The world didn't fall apart. And this is one of the really valuable things in allowing yourself to be human in your relationship, any relationships, is that with every rupture and repair, something strengthens in the relationship. There is a strengthening in the repair. So these human moments are not evidence of failure. They're the opportunity for vulnerability. There's the opportunity for connection on a deeper level. And in that repair, there's this sense of being seen for the ugly part, like you just saw me disorganized and overwhelmed and angry, and you're still here. And I saw you react to that and get mad, and I'm still here. And we can talk about it and we can get through it. And we can be seen in our imperfection. And we can stay in contact and connection with each other despite the shame and through the shame and with the shame. So vulnerability lives after these messy moments, not instead of them. So if we're constantly trying to regulate ourselves out of messy moments because we think that's the way to have a good relationship, we're missing the opportunity for vulnerability and repair, which is what strengthens connection over time. And there's an argument to be made that that capacity for rupture and repair and staying is emotional maturity. That I'm not jumping ship because things got hard. That I'm not blaming you and hating myself and going into this victim place, getting small, withdrawing, not talking to you for a week. But that capacity to wake up the next morning and say, I'm sorry. And here's what's going on. And here's how I feel. And that wasn't appropriate. And someone saying, I get it. Things are hard right now. I'm sorry I reacted. And you move on. And that capacity is what strengthens the relationship. It's the willingness to return. That emotional maturity is the capacity to hold it, the capacity to stay, the willingness to return, staying despite difficulty, and connection and contact, surviving that imperfection because they're going to happen. Human moments are going to happen because we're human. You can't regulate out of it. So real maturity isn't the absence of rupture. It's the presence of the repair. That's where the good stuff lives, That's where the good stuff lives. That's when I come back to my husband feeling shame and not hiding from it and trusting that he won't take advantage of that or make me feel worse about it. And I have to say, we've worked hard to have that in our relationship. I wouldn't say that's like a baseline. I hope it is for some of y'all out there, all of y'all out there. I hope that's your baseline. We had to work for that emotional safety. But the way that we got there is through rupture and repair over and over and over again. And the capacity just grew. So, in the process of unbecoming and unbecoming as a whole, we're not looking to perfect self-management. But it's softening that belief that you have to be organized and perfect and figured out and everything with a bow on it before you can be in relationship with somebody. And one of the principles of unbecoming is that capacity is inherent to you. It's not a skill you build. It's not something you develop. But the capacity for relationship, the capacity to hold experience is inherent to you, meaning it's always been here and it never goes away. So we didn't create the repair capacity by doing things right. It was already there. Capacity lives alongside the human moments. So when I got overwhelmed and I had my moment, my capacity wasn't gone. It's present alongside it. And that's what allowed me to hold the emotional experience I was having and to wake up the next day and say, that was on me. So in unbecoming, we're softening and releasing these ideas that we have to be deeply self-managed in order to hold capacity. It's like, no, your capacity is inherent to you. You access more of it when you give yourself permission to be human. not when you're trying to become less human. You can't become less human. So, big picture, we can't therapy ourselves out of being human. And there's a lot of kind of obsession around regulating perfectly and having the right reaction and communicating just the right way to avoid conflict, to hopefully feel closer, but it actually does the opposite. It creates distance. So maybe notice what it's like to adopt a different perspective of emotional maturity if you're someone like I was who had that earlier version of emotional maturity as being kind of clinical, sterile, therapy speak, all that. But maybe emotional maturity comes in the capacity for rupture and repair. And see what happens when you give yourself permission to be human. And to just kind of come back to the beginning point. It doesn't mean we don't try. I do put a lot of effort into taking care of myself, so hopefully I don't get to those points. I have to work hard to apologize. I'm not good at that. That's something I have to work on a lot. So I still know my shortcomings, but I don't see the moments where I'm not executing them or I'm not managing them as failure. And I think that's the big difference. Emotional maturity is still there when you are human and exists in that capacity to come back. So, since you can't regulate yourself out of being human, can't therapy yourself out of being human, you might as well be human with someone else. It's a lot more fun that way. All right. I think that's it on this one. See you next time. You can find more of this work at theunbecominghub.com. Until next time.